Hello, and you're welcome yet again to another edition of My Opinion on Clevenard TV. I remain your host, Franca Idemudia. And like usual, like I always say, please do remember to keep signing up on www.clevenard.com. All right, my guest this morning is Miss Dianna Games, and we'll be discussing the challenges of doing business in Africa. Miss Games, you're welcome to My Opinion.
Yes, thank you very much, and welcome everybody.
Yeah. So let's start with this. Could you please introduce yourself to our viewers?
All right, my name is Dianna Games. I'm based in Johannesburg in South Africa, and I do a lot of work on the topic of doing business in Africa, what it entails, what the issues are, what companies should think about, etc. And I travel the continent a lot to many countries. I think I've done a lot of work in West Africa in particular. And I also run in South Africa, the South Africa-Nigeria Business Chamber. So I do have a lot of experience of Nigeria in particular.
In the course of your experiences in the country, do your job.
So you broke up. I couldn't quite catch the question.
I would get to hear some of your experiences in having to go around the course of doing your job.
Well, what I've found about, if I've understood the question correctly, what I have found, I've been doing this for many years, for a couple of decades, actually, probably 2 or 3. So I've seen a lot of changes, obviously, in the way Africa works. And I think key among them is being able to travel around Africa. You know, you have a lot more options of hotels, airlines, etc., being able to book these things online, and also just generally the infrastructure in African countries. I think mobile phones has been a really amazing game changer. I think people who hadn't been in Africa before that would not know how difficult it was to do things comparatively. So I've certainly seen a lot of modernization of the continent, and as I say, flying around, it has got more difficult of late with some of the airlines going out of business, but that is a big thing. If you can't move around the continent, it's very difficult to actually do anything really, even though nowadays we do have many more IT type options. But the other thing that is not so easy still is moving. Well, firstly, getting visas. We've got a lot of visa issues between countries, and just the fact of having to get a visa for so many African countries, it costs a lot of money, and in some cases it can be quite hard to get, even though many countries now have visas on arrival. So that is the one thing, and I think the other problem is moving goods around the continent. Even though we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, this is still a challenge because there are so many tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, etc. And so it's not easy, and it's very expensive to move goods across borders and around the country. And there's a lot of challenges in that area that we hope that will be addressed. But and as we produce more, it needs to be a lot easier, and we need to create bigger markets for Africans to be able to make things and sell them, because that is really how countries get rich and have over time in many parts of the world. So there's a lot of issues in that regard that we have to consider. But for the moment, I think there's a lot of issues around skills, jobs. A lot of governments are worried about how to find jobs for their growing population. So the movement of skills is also quite problematic. You know, it's difficult to get work permits, and there's quite a lot of protectionism about jobs and resources. You're starting to see growing a lot across countries, and South Africa would certainly be among them. You know, we've seen the rise of anti-foreigner sentiment going up over the years in South Africa, but it's actually probably reaching all-time highs at this stage, as we've seen with the rise of organizations targeting foreigners in many different ways. And that is you know, it's not impossible that we might see something similar in other parts of the continent, maybe not to the same degree, but you know, these are risks that we do face in the future as we have these growing populations without jobs. And so the big question is, how do you create jobs, and that is something that governments and the private sector have to wrestle with as we move forward, because the problem is not going anywhere.
It's all right. You are quite familiar with the African terrain. So now, what do you think are the factors to consider while setting up business in Africa, Lisa?
Well, I think if you're coming, depends where you're coming from. If you're already in Africa, I think you need to think about the regional economic blocks. We have, as COMESA, EAC, SADC, and ECOWAS, etc. And I think that there's a lot of advantages to tariff advantages and trade advantages within those blocks. So I think if you within Africa, you need to see how you can benefit from those. If you from outside the continent, I think that's very people always say this, but it remains true, is people, you need to understand these markets and you need to do your homework and see where the opportunity is and what could be the problem of realizing that opportunity. And those problems or challenges are multifaceted. You need a lot of information to be able to see what might upset your business plan. But I think also a lot of people look at Africa as sometimes as a continent, sometimes as different countries, and there's many countries. But increasingly, I think a lot of investors are saying, well, let's break this down even more. This is a very big continent. We have to figure out how can we penetrate it? What is the best way to do this? And I think you're seeing more and more companies looking at specific sectors rather than countries, and also even cities, as we seeing this growing urbanization, and urbanization in Africa's the rate of growth is probably the fastest in the world. So we're seeing many people moving to big cities. So that creates a lot of opportunity in a different way, particularly if you're in the consumer-facing space, whether that be anything from sort of power through to actually selling things and building houses, etc. So I think that there's different ways of analyzing the opportunity, and I think it depends where you're coming from and what you're looking for in the way you do that.
All right, it's okay. Now, you made mention of, for example, foreigners coming into the continent to set up businesses. Now, what do you think is a place of social inclusion for any foreigner coming into the country to set up any kind of business?
Well, what you've seen in the last few years, and this is a global thing, it's not just in sort of relating to Africa, but you've seen a really fast-growing kind of attitude of shared value. So and things like Afro-capitalism, where we're looking for investors and looking for investments that are not only doing good for the company itself, but doing good for Africa. So it would be capital that makes a difference, even as it makes it is a good investment plan and there's a good business case. So in a way, that in some ways would speak to social inclusion. You have to look at conflict as part of the other sort of side of the coin of social inclusion, that if you don't involve people more and create opportunities for people, then you are going to see a kickback. And whether that takes the form of some kind of outright conflict, perhaps protests against the government or against other parties, or is just really affecting the way people, consumers in Africa, see your company, and that in turn has implications for how they might, like your product or buy your product or your service. So I think it's become much more mainstream. So the issue of social inclusion, people are looking at how to do better. I think there's a phrase now, do better by making everyone's lives better as far as possible, whether that be communities in the areas in which they work, or their staff, or in other ways. So there's many different ways that's happening, but it is much more mainstream than it used to be. And now with these ESG principles, a lot of companies are under pressure to consider all these issues and build them into their strategies and their business plans. So it's no longer a nice to have. There's a lot of rankings on ESG, how governments, how companies are ranked there, especially big multinational companies. So, so these are all newish kind of concepts that have really come to the fore in the last few years, and that is changing the way investors are look in investing in Africa and for the better. And this is coupled, of course, with governments putting more pressure on in policy and in other ways on investors to do more as they come into Africa, given the need.
It's right. So in Africa, let's look at human capital building. Okay, building human capital. Okay, you see some investors coming into the country and they will tell you that there are really no capable hands to handle such businesses for them. So what is the position of human capital building in Africa itself so that they can better themselves and they be able to have a better chance and opportunities to handle businesses of the foreigners?
Well, again, I think we've seen certainly coming out of South Africa, we've seen a lot of our multinational companies have created a lot of new kind of leadership group of leaders, if you like, for that move around Africa and take up top positions around different African countries. And they're not South Africans. Some of them might be, but they, for example, if you look at MTN or companies like that, they spend a huge amount of money on staff, making sure that their staff are trained and are also kind of able to move to other markets where there's greater need, or if they're opening a new business somewhere, that they have the skilled people to do that. But that's at one end of the thing. On the other hand, you've got, for example, oil and gas, which is a big investor sector, and energy, power, etc., where it does need a lot. You need a lot of skilled workers, and so training is a big cost to companies. And but nevertheless, I think a lot of that has to happen because in many countries you're seeing a real push towards local content where there's quotas and in certain sectors, and particularly in the resources sector, where you have to employ a certain number of locals. And
we've lost Ms. Games' connection then, and we do hope to be back shortly. Let's take a short break here.
So you're saying my connection is not very good?
In the 21st century's technological advancement, we all seek opportunities to move and network with the emerging space. Introducing Clevenard blog and event posting. Do you think you have some interesting materials, good content, articles, and stories? Then feel free to publish them on Clevenard blog and events page, just as team of our writers are doing presently. By blogging on Clevenard's blogs and events, you benefit from our reach and network. There are a constant stream of people visiting our social platform, and we have figured out just how to distribute our contents. This means you can basically skip the line and get access to a big audience from day one. Furthermore, we can help you get in touch with important people for projects with possibilities of translating your content into other languages and republishing them on Clevenard. This helps preserve and protect your content from getting lost. What's more, you also get to be part of our team with access to our network and lots of exclusives, behind-the-scenes information. And of course, you get full credit for everything you do, which brings you popularity and make extra income. Sign up now on Clevenard.com and start blogging to your advantage. Please see the tutorial video on how to blog or post events on Clevenard blogs and events. For more information, contact info@clevenard.com +34 631 279811. Website www.clevenard.com. Clevenard, your blogs, your identity. In the 21st century.
All right, you're welcome back, and you are still on my opinion on Clevenard TV, and my guest still remains Miss Dianna Games. All right, yeah, I like to ask this, man. You know, Africa is regarded as a consumer economy. In other words, we don't really produce anything, and everything we use on the land is being imported into the country. What do you think the effect of this is in Africa?
Well, this culture of import dependence is it's a legacy of the deindustrialization that we've seen in Africa over the past, say, 2 decades or so. So we're not making a lot of the things that we used to be able to make. And people are now, we've seen a real shift in African economies into the services sector. So, so in fact, that's part of the whole deindustrialization. And in South Africa, we have maybe less of an issue with that. We have a lot of value-added goods made in South Africa that are actually exported across the continent, and similarly Kenya and I think Zimbabwe to some extent, and Zambia. But sure, there is this real import dependence, and unfortunately, one of the big areas of import dependence is foodstuffs. And this is, of course, a particular problem at the moment when, during COVID, and of course during now with the war in the Ukraine, where we short of fertilizers and wheat and other things. So there's just a real pressure for food security in Africa, again with growing populations. And we just I don't think the continent is moving fast enough in this regard. There's a lot of people now paying attention to agriculture, but it is tough. It's a tough sector. It's very fragmented, and it requires quite a lot of investment and strong leadership and policy. So I think, and the crux of that is that SMEs and smallholder farmers are the backbone of agriculture in Africa. So that's very difficult to address because these are not centralized things that you can easily intervene. So, and also what we see is it has quite a significant impact on availability of foreign exchange. And I think a lot of countries have that problem, and particularly Nigeria is in a particular kind of crisis at the moment with regard to foreign exchange. So, and we import a lot of stuff from China. If you look at the trade balances of African countries, not just China, but Europe, America, etc. And I think that this is part of the reason for this deindustrialization, as I say, is the shift to services, but also it's very expensive to produce things in Africa. The power is a big problem. The cost of power, the availability of power, of infrastructure, decent roads to move things around, getting things to the port, the efficiency of the ports themselves, the cost of money. Africa is regarded as a high-risk continent. And so this makes it, we have ratings, some kind of ratings issues where countries are rated, and the cost of capital is expensive. We've got a lot of currency volatility, and also policy is not that friendly to production, to manufacturing, etc. And so there's a lot of issues there about why we could produce more if it was easier and cheaper to do it ourselves. But then again, that also does require getting the input. Sometimes the people can produce it, but they have to get the inputs for manufacturing out of other parts of the world. So there's this long chain. What we need to do, really, the big picture, the big message out of that really is that we need to become a lot more self-sufficient, and that requires proper policy being put in place that really recognizes that and does everything to this end, not just policy, but also attracting capital. We need to, find out what is blocking capital. Why are people not manufacturing more? And if you talk to manufacturing organizations and companies, they will outline a lot of the things that I've just said, that it's not, it's expensive to produce, it's expensive to distribute. We still have a lot of trade barriers. And a lot of countries do have quite a taste for imports and maybe don't accept locally made products, and often regard them as inferior, which sometimes they are. But I mean, you've got to start somewhere. So, yeah.
So we are going to apply the different challenges you just mentioned, and then we'll try and pick it out one after the other. But now let me ask this question: what is the place of local content in building an economy? I know you said one or two things about it, but I still want you to speak more on it. The place of local content in building any economy.
Well, you're seeing a lot of content legislation. South Africa is, again, focusing very much on that, trying to stop imports from other parts of the world and to prioritize local producers. Now, again, that can have a knock-on effect on consumers. I mean, it's well intended at all times, but their knock-on effect can be quite negative. For example, it'll push up the costs of things. Maybe we're in countries where it costs more to produce the goods locally than it does to bring them from China or from another part of the world, because we are high cost economies and we're high cost producers. So that is one of the issues. But nevertheless, I think it's we have to look at it again. It speaks to the resilience, building the resilience that I spoke about. And that has to start somewhere. And where you've seen it, I mean, in Nigeria, for example, they've had it. They've had a local content policy in the oil and gas sector for more than a decade. And there's been a lot of development on the back of that. But what you also have to watch out for in some of these cases is the fact that we don't always have the skills, and you can't attract investment. For example, if you look at the big gas LNG projects in Mozambique, there's many areas, the spin-off areas of such a big investment where you can use local talent and build up skills. But in some cases, these skills are highly specialized, and that takes quite a lot longer to build local capacity. So I think the thing is, countries, it's not just a one-size-fits-all concept. You have to look at what available skills you've got, look at the kind of economic history, if you like, of the country, and what kind of production and what the skills resource base is. And in order to determine whether your local content policy is going to be a blunt instrument that will push investors away, or whether it is going to be maybe a bit slower but benefit your economy more in the long run. So there's a lot of issues there. And then, of course, like in South Africa, we've got a critical skills list, which I think a lot of countries also have. So these people are given priorities in terms of work permits. So it's not just that you can just go to a country and say, well, I'd like to set up a business here. The permit will be evaluated along the lines of the critical skills list to say, well, we've got a lot of people involved in the sector that you want to invest in. And then possibly that will affect your ability to get a permit for your business and for yourself to stay in the country. So countries have their economic priorities. But I think that we are seeing in some of this, it's moving slower than you would think, given the importance of local content. Because of the need is so great, and typically you see it in the resources sector, and it's, I think, slowly but surely much more in the telecom sector. These are high, these are high focus areas for a lot of government. So so I think that we need more to be done. But as I say, there's the danger of people being over ambitious, or governments setting targets that are over ambitious and sort of that are destined to fail because they don't take into account the local realities of the skills base that exists and just generally the country, the economic direction of the country. So, yeah.
Most scholars tell us the disadvantages of relying so much on importation. Okay, can you just give an advice to the African continent? What the danger the danger in having to base everything they use on foreigners?
Well, I think we've seen exactly the kind of dangers of that. Looking at COVID, the impact of the world shutting down, ports, all the systems were shut down. Goods couldn't get through. Trucks weren't able to move across borders in many places. Manufacturing had closed down. And so, there was a lot of food, since the beginning of COVID, food prices in Africa have gone up by more than 40%. And of course, now we've had, this has been ramped up by the war in Ukraine and pushing up the cost of fuel and of oil and things like that. So the danger is that you're very vulnerable if you haven't got self-sufficiency at home, particularly in food. If you're not producing enough food to feed your people, then you are immediately vulnerable, whether there's a crisis like COVID or there isn't. But also, supply chains, long supply chains, that go across into other regions, are expensive. We don't have a lot of great infrastructure in many parts of Africa, so everything has to move by road. The costs of getting goods around is pushes up prices. So again, it gets back to the inflationary effect that I already spoke about. So it makes us vulnerable to food shortages. It makes us vulnerable to inflationary costs. We import inflation from other parts of the world where when we're importing so many goods, and a lot of these goods are not needed. I mean, I think that we've seen also in Nigeria the list of Nigeria had a long list of imports that were banned. for a long time, maybe still does, and various import restrictions, etc. And just looking to say, well, if do we need all of these goods, and if we do, why are we not making them ourselves? And I think that's the central question: why are we not making what we need ourselves? And it can't be that difficult. What we have to do, though, is address it. Governments have to again look at policy. They have to make sure that we can get investment into that space, and set up more factories, and more food processing, etc. And we have to start this process. I mean, we're still in a situation after all these years where Africa is not only a net food importer, but we still got millions of people who are, face starvation on this continent, and yet we have some of the most arable land in the world. You often hear people say that thing, but it remains true. And the question is, why are we still here? And I think that the crisis, the two crises sort of back to back, which is COVID and the Ukraine, the impact of the Ukraine war, has been a bit of a wake up call. Well, let's hope that that's the impact it is having, so that we do properly look at this issue and say, why are we still here, and what can we do about it? And getting governments to live up the promises they've made and the agreements they've signed up to, and getting and addressing the issue of risk. A lot of investors see Africa as a high risk place to put their money, and people often say that risk is overstated, but is it? It depends where you're putting your money, and so there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and we keep saying that, but we actually, it's time to do something about it, and things are happening. It's not to say nothing is happening. I mean, there is a lot of development and a lot of international partnerships, particularly in agriculture, and we're seeing a lot of investment flowing into renewable energy in particular, which is another big sector of investor interest. I mean, our need for energy is so great across Africa, everywhere. South Africa used to be an outlier, but now we're fully in the frame in terms of needing more power. We just can't keep up with the need. So that is an area, that I think there's a lot of policy change, a lot of re-examination of what's needed to attract investment into the sector. So I think, it's not like money's not coming into Africa and that things aren't happening. People feel they're happening too slowly. I mean, the needs are just too great. We have this huge unemployed populations that are growing all the time, school leavers with no prospects, and all these kind of things. And so, it does, people said at the beginning of during COVID, that it would never be business as usual again. But actually, before the Ukraine war happened, we were sinking right back into business as usual, actually. And it's easy to say, that shouldn't have happened. And many governments were reacting, literally putting out fires from still, lingering from the COVID impact. So not everybody was in a strong enough position to start reforming policies and looking at new pathways to things. But now we've had two crises back to back, and it really is time for things to change and look much more proactively at how we can be much less vulnerable to all of these kind of problems that are not of our own making.
All right. In the foreign market, again, we tell African product being considered substandard. Okay. Now, how do you reconcile this concept? Why is it that anything that comes out of Africa is being considered as below standard?
Well, I don't think that's strictly true. I think that, what happens when you export goods from Africa, they have to go through a lot of standards and phytosanitary checks and things like that. So if they make it into international markets, they are often not branded as African in any case. But so people wouldn't be able to make that judgment call. I mean, if you look at cut flowers, coffee, tea, and I don't know, a range of other goods. Suddenly, suddenly that list seemed quite short. But these are things that a lot of countries have had deep roots in international markets for these kind of products. Unfortunately, what you are seeing is a pattern of these are still not having value added to them. So what you're saying is maybe something different. So if you pick up a bag of coffee in I don't know, in France, and it says made in Kenya, would somebody look at it and say, well, that's made in Africa, I don't know if it's going to be good enough? I don't think they would. I mean, I think that what Africa has done quite well is the things that we've done well, we've branded quite well. And I think coffee, tea, flowers, all those kind of things are among them. It's a question of how we brand it. I mean, those things would not be in those markets if they were in any way substandard. And there are many goods that are substandard and are sent right back again. They don't make it into these markets. So I think that we have to be a lot more confident about what we're making and that it can compete anywhere else in the world and make sure that it does. I think one of the issues with that is there's a lot of countries that have no standards bureaus and certification kind of bodies to check the kind of goods that people are exporting out of Africa, and therefore they're not. There needs to be more awareness of how you actually penetrate. The same as we're talking about foreigners coming to Africa. Africans also need to be far more aware of how to penetrate those other markets and exactly what is required. And then they need to do those things because otherwise they won't get in there. So, but the other thing is to say, of course, export markets are good. They make countries rich again, but also you have to consider that our needs are so great in Africa, and that's again where the African Free Trade Area comes in. We have markets everywhere that need more than they're getting now, or that they are importing from elsewhere. The problem really is per capita incomes, So we need people to be able to afford the goods that we're making in Africa, and we also need to make sure that they're not so more expensive than these imports that we have become used to.
Right. So we also have when you talk about branding, and I got actually interested in that because you see there are companies in Africa. Let me use Nigeria for instance. Okay, goods are produced in Nigeria, and because they know that they will not be regarded anywhere or considered up to standard, they are branded or given the brand of another country, or foreign country. Okay, you see shoes, for example, made in Nigeria, and they tell you, no, it is not made in Nigeria, it is made in Italy, just like that. So does that pose any threat to the economic of the African country producing that product itself?
Well, I think it does. I think there's a lack of self-belief that starts in Africa, and the lack of proper branding. But I think it does come from maybe a long period of substandard goods, shortcuts that people have taken, and things don't last as long as they should. But is that any worse than China? A lot of goods made in China or made cheaply in Asia also don't last. But, the thing is that they're cheap enough where people think, well, it's not such a crisis then if they don't last that long. Are our goods competitive? And they need to be competitive. Otherwise, we can't brand ourselves properly. So shoes made in Nigeria. I mean, Nigeria has a big leather industry, or it certainly used to. And that should be, you probably find a lot of that leather is being sold into countries like Italy to make shoes in Italy. Again, it's like we need to make the stuff and make it well and brand it properly. We do have a branding problem, and a lot of it is actually a mindset issue within Africa itself. We really need to get over that and improve the sort of whole brand of Africa and make it desirable in other countries. But to do that, you have to back it up with something solid, and that would be the quality goods and services that are being offered. Otherwise, you can't paper over a problem and try and brand it, because it will fall flat eventually. So again, I think that we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, you look at a lot of fashion coming out of Nigeria, fashion, music, etc. That is an area where Africa has also done well, and that's because the product backs up the claim that these are new, interesting, dynamic things that you can find in international markets. So it's all about that. We need to match the brand, and we need to and then create the brand back on the back of doing things better.
Right. Within a short we just discuss and go through the different challenges as experienced by this country. Please don't go away.
Clevenard in Diaspora Television is an internet online TV service. What sets us apart is a unique combination of hit African content, first and exclusive international free movies, series, musics, news, events, documentaries, tourism, teleshopping shows, youth TV programs, and live interviews. Clevenard Diaspora Television is available throughout sub-Saharan Africa and to the diaspora markets worldwide. Take your entertainment with you wherever you go. Watch on your smartphone, tablet, laptop, smart TV, depending on your device. Watch free movies with Clevenard Movies Television. Stop searching for free movies websites and watch Clevenard Movies Television. Watch your favorite African shows anywhere at any time. Don't forget to check out our top 5 TV channels created to get you informed. TV1, Clevenard in Diaspora Television. TV2, Clevenard Youth Television. TV3, Clevenard Movies Television. TV4, Clevenard Teleshopping Television. TV5, Clevenard Tourism Television. To start watching, sign up at www.clevenard.com and follow the easy steps. Once you're done, log into the Clevenard website or app on your device, click on any one of our 5 TV channels, and hit play. We will be very satisfied and happy to welcome you to our team as one of our new business partners. Contact info@clevenard.com +34 631 279811. Website www.clevenard.com. Clevenard in Diaspora Television is an internet online TV service.
All right, you're welcome back. All right, like I've said earlier, we've practically discussed every challenges faced in the sector in Africa. So what I just want us to go through now is the different advice or advice that you would like to leave with each people or to resolve these conflicts. For example, we have custom challenges. What would be your advice in areas pertaining to custom challenges? What would be your advice to the authorities?
Customs challenges. You're talking about customs and excise.
Yeah, and in having to export things out of Africa to the international markets.
Well, you know, again, it's if you look at okay, let's call it trade rather. You know, a lot of countries make it expensive to export as well as to import, and I think what's really needed is a very strong look at existing legislation and regulations, and just to see how are these impacting on the countries or companies' ability to trade, and what are the costs? You know, I keep talking about competitiveness. In order to develop manufacturing and trade, we have to be competitive. There's no point in sending something that you can only you have to charge a certain price in your country because the operating climate is expensive, and sending it to another country where you're competing with goods from places like China and other parts of Asia. And even with the African Free Trade Area, as they bring down tariffs from within Africa, and you still have tariffs for goods coming from outside the continent, even then, those our goods might still be more expensive than, for example, something imported from China. So I think part of the African Free Trade Area initiative is really looking to see how Africa can perform better and what is holding us up. What are the barriers to trade that are not just tariffs? There's many other barriers to trade. And, there just has to be the political will to do this. And we have been trading for many years in regional blocks, long before the African Free Trade Area came along. And so this is nothing new. People talk about this AFCFTA as if it's a silver bullet of some sort. And what it does is it escalates the kind of scale and maybe the political willingness as a result of governments to do the right thing.
It's all right. So give us a last word for African entrepreneurs. Then we shut down the program for today. A last word for the African entrepreneurs.
African entrepreneurs. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. Yeah. Well, again, this also speaks to policy issues. It's not easy for entrepreneurs and SMEs to do well in African countries because there's a lot of the legislation doesn't make it easy for them. A lot of times there are no special sort of dispensations for small companies. They have to just grind along, as much as big pay the same kind of taxes that big companies do, obviously in a percentage basis, and so on. So there's not always a lot of support for SMEs and entrepreneurs. We're starting to see that change, as you've seen a lot of capital coming into the continent for startups, particularly tech startups, fintech, agri-tech, health tech, etc. But that money is mostly coming from outside the continent. And I know that Nigeria, for example, has in the pipeline something called a startup bill, which is going to look at ways that they can direct support directly to sort of small companies and companies starting up and trying to build businesses. But overall, the policy environment is quite hostile to SMEs. And I think more needs to be done in this way because, there's also the risk factor. It's hard for SMEs to borrow money. Money can be expensive, especially if they borrow from banks, but there aren't a lot of other avenues for them. And then you've got power again. Everybody's suffering from power, but when you're an SME, you don't have the deep pockets to get other solutions for that power. I mean, the price of generators, the price of fuel, all of that sort of thing. These can cripple a small business. So again, until the infrastructure is there, the policy environment is right. I think that's true to say that creativity is there to a large extent, but people don't know how to do business plans. And there's been many interventions over the years. But I think there's also a sense that people, that a lot of people go into government or into politics because it's more stable. They see that there's a lot of success there. And I think there needs to be a much more kind of promotion of small business, of people creating their own businesses. Otherwise, you're never going to solve this. You can't solve the jobs problem, the size of the jobs problem in Africa by simply, getting people to work for companies or government. We've got to find another way to do this. And I think that should be the way, is building startups, entrepreneurs, SMEs, whichever you call them. I think that is the way forward. I think it has to be.
Thank you so much, Ms. Games, for being my guest today on My Opinion, and we do hope you have the opportunity to grace our set today in the near future. So thank you so much for the program.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for an interesting discussion.
Okay. Today and to next week, we will come your way with another guest on this program. I remain Frank Dianna Games. I'm saying have a blessed day from here. Bye.